Okay guys, thank you very much for choosing to watch this video, and I will be explaining the basic steps of what I'm doing as I go along. So I start with getting some reference images from Google, and then in edit mode using mirror modifier I just get the basic mesh. Then I move over to sculpt mode, and still I'm not using dynamic topology, just using normal sculpting. I'm getting the general mesh. Then I move into dynamic topology and turning it to a high number so the topology doesn't get too detailed and I don't get too many tries. I'm just still getting a general shape. You always want to start with the bigger areas before you go into details, constantly looking from the front and side view to make sure that it is in accordance with the background images. I just want to point out that this entire project took about an hour to an hour and a half. Always make sure to save your file every so often, even have a lot of multiple saves. It's always better to have too many saves than too little saves. Right now is the perfect time to hit that subscribe button and smash that like button below to encourage me to continue making these tutorials for you. When sculpting, it's always easier to work with separate objects for separate areas of your mesh than to join it all together. So as you can see here, I put the teeth on a separate object so it doesn't interfere with the sculpting, and only at the end did I join them together. You can use H to hide part of your mesh. There's an add-on called Bool, which is already in Blender, which you can add from the user preferences, which allows you to use the Boolean modifier between two objects in a very effective and easy way. You just select one object, select the other object, and then either click Union, Difference, or the last one, I forgot what it is, and it just does it for you. You don't have to delete the original object and all that. Remember, you don't have to put so much detail into areas of the mesh that the camera won't see. And if you know from the beginning that you're only going to do one render from one angle, you don't really need to do detail to the back of that. Just focus on what the camera is actually going to pick up. A very good thing to do before beginning any project you are working on in Blender is, if you know what you're going to be doing in this project, for instance sculpting or animating or working with textures and UV unwrapping, firstly watch a few basic tutorials on YouTube to give you a general understanding on how it works, and then just spend 10-15 minutes if you have the time just messing about and familiarizing yourself with the different settings and buttons, so that when it comes down to your project you won't waste your time with like all the details and you could have a smoother workflow. Over here again, I'm just repositioning the teeth and moving them to where they should be, making them look more realistic. Always make sure to check your object from all different angles, because if it looks good from one angle, it might not necessarily look good from a different angle. Here you could see by those teeth why having them as two separate objects is a big help. I'm just going to put on a quick material, just see how things are looking before I go to more detail. And over here you can see already I knew I was going to post this on Instagram, so I set my camera dimensions to a 1:1 ratio. Now for the finer detail, like the cracks in the skull, over here I used the much smaller brush size, which you can change by pressing F. And I also decreased the number by the dynamic topology, so that there's a much higher resolution for these cracks. So around the cracks the resolution is very low, but just in those cracks you get a very high resolution, so it looks realistic to some extent. It's very important that when you come towards the end of your sculpting, if you want it to look realistic, that you make it asymmetrical. You'll see what I do soon is I go around with the grab brush, or G, and I just move around big parts of the mesh just to make it a little bit off scale, and I also do it with the teeth. So I'm going to make sure they're not symmetrical. It'll give it a much more realistic look. Teeth were very fun because I could just mess around a lot and there wasn't really any rules I had to follow. What I did there, where there was one bit pointing out and it wasn't smoothing properly, is if you grab one face on the part that's sticking out and then you press Ctrl and plus a couple times, so you get a bunch of faces, and then you press Ctrl and X, it will turn all of those faces into one single face if you are on face select mode, which is a very useful tip. Here I join the teeth and the skull together. It's a very basic material just with the layer weights. And then using facing, I like to use that a lot. Then I add some basic lights just to see how it's looking so far. Now for the animation, I animated the colors of the few lights that I had in the scene, and then a couple of mix shaders and colors in my node setup using and then keyframes and just messing about. There were again, when there's no rules to follow, you have a lot more freedom, and I could just mess about and do whatever I wanted. Looking back at this, I realized I could have saved myself a lot of time rendering, where I did not need to render a whole animation of this, because I anyways took it all into Adobe Premiere and edited it there. So I could have just rendered one frame on each angle, and then in Adobe Premiere duplicate all the frames again and again to sort of draw out the time and make an animation. So if you have an animation and the first, let's say 20 frames are the same image, you don't need to render all 20 frames. You could just render one of them and then repeat the frame 20 times, and you save yourself a lot of render time. And lastly, for the whole glitch effect, I just watched a YouTube tutorial and messed about in Adobe Premiere until things looked right. And here we have the complete animation again. I hope you enjoyed this video of my time-lapse and tutorial, and please comment below with some feedback on how I can improve for future videos. Thank you very much and have a great day.